This is the CBS Evening News. Connie Chung reporting. Good evening. President Bush today was compelled to disagree with his defense secretary over whether Mikhail Gorbachev will survive in office in the face of his reform efforts. CBS News White House correspondent Jacqueline Adams has more on the very public difference of opinion.
En route to New York to celebrate the 200th anniversary of George Washington's inauguration, President Bush was pressed to clarify his administration's views on the dramatic changes now going on inside the Soviet Union. Yes, he wants Mikhail Gorbachev's reforms to succeed. No, he doesn't agree with his Defense Secretary Dick Cheney, who predicted publicly over the weekend that Gorbachev will fail.
If I had to guess today, I would guess that he would ultimately fail. That is to say that he will not be able to reform the Soviet economy to turn it into an efficient modern society.
The White House Chief of Staff shrugged off as healthy the public airing of the administration's conflicting views.
I think the President and Secretary Baker, in a sense, are hoping that Gorbachev's movement towards reform and restructuring the Soviet Union does succeed.
Despite the flap, the president seemed determined to enjoy the reenactment of George Washington's inauguration.
So help me God.
On the spot where the first president described his anxieties and deficiencies, the 41st president admitted some things haven't changed.
So much remains constant, so much endures, our faith in freedom. For individuals, freedom to choose, for nations, self-determination and democracy.
For the last week, President Bush has been crisscrossing the country trying to erase the image of an administration adrift and unfocused. This weekend's mixed signals on Gorbachev's chances of success, though, just prove that after 101 days in office, there's a lot of work still to be done. Jacqueline Adams, CBS News, the White House.
British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher today tried but failed to budge West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl from continuing to press for superpower talks on reducing short-range nuclear weapons in Europe. The meeting in West Germany lasted 3 hours. Ron Allen has details.
Prime Minister Thatcher and Chancellor Kohl were all smiles as they started their talks. But later it was clear the two leaders had dug in their heels on opposite sides of a dispute that strikes at the very core of the NATO alliance. The West Germans' desire for the U.S. to negotiate with the Soviets to eliminate American short-range nuclear missiles in Europe that have been a key element of the NATO strategy.
NATO doctrine, again, is flexible response. Flexible response isn't something you mouth and then it comes into effect.
This has nothing at all to do with the Germans having become unreliable or anything like that. There can be no question of that.
Kohl has adopted an anti-nuclear position because of increasing political pressure at home. But that position has put him at loggerheads with U.S. policy, which insists the Lance nuclear missile should be modernized, not negotiated away.
If we remove those nuclear weapons, it would present us with a different military and strategic problem that we're not ready to accept yet.
That problem? The Soviet Union's overwhelming advantage in conventional forces in Europe. But some U.S. analysts believe that problem could be overcome by reducing the Soviet forces along with the short-range missiles.
I think there is a major window of opportunity right now to achieve substantial results in arms reductions with the Soviet Union. This is because of Mr. Gorbachev, who has made some stunning concessions on long-established Soviet positions.
The Bush administration is deeply concerned that the West German position will drive a wedge in the NATO alliance. The diplomatic maneuvering will move into high gear as NATO tries to pull together a united front for its 40th anniversary next month. Ron Allen, CBS News, Washington.
New questions were raised today in the battleship Iowa disaster. Quoting survivors, a published report says a 16-inch gun in the number 1 turret misfired shortly before a gun in the number 2 turret exploded. 47 crewmen were killed. The report says the misfire may have caused the drill to be shifted to turret 2 earlier than planned. The Navy would neither confirm nor deny that a misfire occurred. NASA technicians in Florida worked today to repair a pump and fuel line on the shuttle Atlantis. While a new launch date is decided, the Atlantis pilot and co-pilot flew jet trainers back to the Johnson Space Center in Houston. NASA hopes to try again this week, possibly on Friday. Coming up next on the CBS Evening News, solidarity hits the campaign trail in Poland, and later on Inside Sunday, the presidency and George Bush. The first 200 years, the first 100 days.
And it means
kind of fruit. The kind that's fresh, moist, and plump. That's why Sunsweet are my favorite kind of pitted prunes. Moist, plump, and fresh. Sunsweet, because the best prunes are fresh prunes.
Lucky for this diver, he has a thin, powerful seal. So thin it's virtually airtight. So powerful it even holds up to pressure. No, it's not on this diver's mask. The seal is on his dentures. Extra Hold Fast Teeth has a seal so thin yet so powerful, it's virtually airtight. For a hold that's closer to real than any ordinary adhesive, Extra Hold Fast Teeth, the extra hold seal that's closer to real.
Compaq has consistently led the industry with products that incorporate the latest technology.
Ms. Lucas, it's time to board.
You have time for this?
I have time.
The Compaq laptop pushes the state of the art.
Now that's neat.
It's my secret weapon.
Compaq understands what its customers want.
Welcome to New York. How was the flight?
I can't wait to show you.
Gas pain, bloating. Gas-X has the strongest, fastest relief ingredient. Painful gas is like beer bubbles. Add the leading antacid. Add Gas-X. Only Gas-X gets rid of the gas. The strongest, fastest reliever for gas pain and bloating. Gas-X.
Poland's now legal Solidarity Union formally launched its campaign today for next month's parliamentary election, the country's first contested vote in more than 40 years. Bert Quint reports.
Campaign 89 in Poland. Still a far cry from the free elections the West takes for granted, but today a brand new legal opposition organized by Solidarity took to the campaign trail seeking signatures and money to back its candidates. And for the first time, candidates from the Communist Party and the rubber stamp parties that are its allies found themselves forced to argue their cause and ask for votes from people who suddenly have some choice. Under the complicated rules worked out between the government and Solidarity, the Communists and their allies are guaranteed a majority in the new Polish parliament to be elected in June. But a significant number of seats will be contested in the freest election the communist world has known, enough to give the opposition at least veto power. The next election, in 4 years, is to be wide open. Lech Wałęsa isn't running, but he gave his blessings and a propaganda boost to the 261 opposition candidates by posing for campaign pictures with them. Other prominent Solidarity members are seeking election. The historian, Adam Michnik, says he'll stand in Parliament for the same democratic principles he's often been jailed for. Solidarity spokesman Janusz Oniuszkiewicz began his grassroots campaign explaining why Solidarity is competing in restricted elections instead of waiting for really free ones. He made it clear he believes the Polish reforms have Moscow's approval and that Poland has to seize the chance for democracy while it can. We don't know, he said, how long Mikhail Gorbachev will last. Bert Quint, CBS News, Warsaw.
In Moscow, police today arrested leaders of several underground political groups. The dissidents were selling their illegal publications and refused orders to disperse. The groups want multi-party elections, free trade unions, and other democratic reforms. A democratic institution is 200 years old today, the presidency of the United States. 200 years from George Washington to George Bush. Tonight on Inside Sunday, the two Georges, how the presidency began, and the challenges facing the man who occupies the office today. We begin with Wyatt Andrews and the bicentennial celebrations in our nation's first capital.
I do solemnly swear.
At times, this was a quirky-looking ceremony. A professional actor in wig and period clothes played out parts of George Washington's first inauguration, the image of America's first ceremony of state 200 years ago today. To many people, today is the nation's real bicentennial, not the 4th of July, when a group of rebels simply declared independence, but this day in April, 13 years after that, when the wartime leader of those rebels had to come up with a government. Today was the celebration of how that modest, capable man took the Constitution and then invented how to be president.
It was the very fact that he didn't want to be king and that he very reluctantly left Mount Vernon to take this job that made all the people in the country want to be for him.
How unlikely it must have seemed then that we might become United States.
President Bush came to honor Mr. Washington today. George to George, he has called it. There are no kings in America, but this is the celebration of that unbroken line of succession. Every 4 years, another inauguration. A ceremony Americans take for granted when history shows this to be unique.
It's all very smooth. Not every country enjoys that type of stability.
It may seem not unusual in the American context. In the context of the world, it's absolutely extraordinary.
And in the world of today, they are still discovering the achievement. Students in China demand new forms of democracy. The Poles move toward elections. The Soviet Union itself plays at the edges of a freely elected government. This bicentennial celebrates the luxury of being beyond that. In the middle of this celebration of freedom, George Bush, along with the New York police, found themselves unexpectedly put to the test. Demonstrators tried to drown out the president's speech. What about AIDS, they were shouting. Invited guests grew ugly. The police grew nervous. But in America, when the police move in, they move in to protect the demonstrators. In America, when the successor to George Washington is speaking, it's not a crime to shout him down. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, New York.
In a moment, a look at the first 100 days of the 41st president. Inside Sunday continues on the CBS Evening News.
The elevators are out?
I'm sorry, Mr. James.
Ed James? Charlie Barnes, MCI. I'm your 8 o'clock.
Well, step into my conference room.
One report covers all your offices. Perfect when you open France.
France? You're doing homework, huh? AT&T doesn't give me that.
I know.
Charlie, I take you to my boss now.
But?
He's on 25. I'll carry you.
MCI. We are the better long-distance company.
You're on your way.
Who would have figured it? I grow up in the city and end up testing products for the farm. Like this one from Dow. We study its effects in the classroom and check the results in the field. It yields more food, more profits for family farmers, and greater groundwater protection. But Dow gave me a grant to find out how to make it work even better. You know, I like being a city kid working in a cornfield.
Dow lets you do great things.
Ladies, now you can stop shaving and enjoy beautiful hair-free legs for weeks at a time with the Lady Remington Smooth and Silky Rechargeable Hair Removal System. Its hygienic rotating roller quickly removes hair below the skin. Lady Remington.
Where does it hurt?
Here.
For heartburn and gas, your medical answer is Extra Strength Malox Plus. Its doctor-recommended formula neutralizes more than any leading antacid. Ask your doctor about Extra Strength Malox Plus.
George Washington was arguably the most popular president in U.S. history. He was twice the unanimous choice of the Electoral College. While George Bush can't make that claim, on this 101st day of his presidency, he can point to a recent poll that said 6 out of 10 Americans approve of his performance. Almost half say that so far it's been more style than substance. If so, it appears to be paying off.
You want me to kiss? Oh, that's my girl.
23-year-old Lori Tesmer lives in Westville, New Jersey with her 4-year-old daughter. She didn't vote for George Bush. Too cold and distant, she said. Hard for her to relate to. But she's warmed up to him.
Seeing him with his wife and his family, he just seems like a completely different person than I imagined. He seems more personable and friendly.
In McKinley, California, Audrey Wiley's been running the same laundromat for 20 years. She's been a Democrat for longer than that. But this time, she voted for George Bush, and she's not sorry.
I think he's doing real great. He looks confident and gives me the impression that he's going to do something.
Impressions, feelings. That's what Lori and Audrey talk about when they talk about George Bush. Not what he's done, but what he's like. The warm spin he puts on things.
With all his kids and grandkids and stuff, it gives you a warm feeling like back in the old days, like happy days are here again.
The man is the message, and that's no accident.
He seems to have taken on
the major problem that he was identified with during the course of the campaign. And that was a sense that he couldn't relate to the American public and that he wasn't open.
To hear Linda and Audrey tell it, not anymore. They like his homespun style. They like his wife. They like him. Mr. Bush has gotten their support, but some say he's gotten it the easy way.
High popularity reflects in part that you haven't done anything. Every time you do something, you make someone mad.
His supporters say that's not fair. What he's done quietly, using charm and compromise, working out a deal with Congress over aid to the Contras, bailing out the savings and loan institutions, and intervening, although some say too late, in the Alaskan oil spill. But his supporters and his critics know that Mr. Bush's popularity has yet to be tested.
This support for the president is wide. It is not deep. He is not charismatic. He is not inspirational. Should conditions change, the public will very quickly become disapproving.
That was a good one. But right now, conditions are just fine for Lori. And as long as he doesn't bobble the ball, she feels just fine about George Bush.
I'm starting to trust him more than I thought I would. He seems real nice. Yeah, I like him.
In the first 100 days of George Washington's presidency, key foreign policy concerns included peace treaties with the Indians. 200 years later, George Bush also faces challenges involving peace and treaties. The stakes now, of course, much higher. As Bill Plant reports, the president has some major decisions to make.
In the first days of the new administration, one of any president's weightiest concerns was one of the least talked about: arms control. The U.S. and the Soviet Union, between them, have more than 24,000 nuclear warheads for their long-range strategic weapons. President Reagan and Soviet leader Gorbachev reached an agreement in principle to cut the number of warheads by half, to 6,000 each, and limit each side to 1,600 launchers, rockets, missiles, and bombers. Over the next 2 years, negotiators in Geneva worked out much of the actual treaty language. 100 days into the Bush administration, the new president faces a choice. He can take the treaty language left on the table by the Reagan administration, or he can move to put his own stamp on any potential agreement. But as of now, just before Secretary of State Baker goes to Moscow to set a date for reopening arms talks, the whole treaty question is still unresolved.
Unless there is a real need to change something, it ought not to be changed, because the Soviets will ask for something in return that may not be in our interest to provide. You know, there's the saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
But the pressures for change come not only from those who want Mr. Bush to get the political benefit of putting his own stamp on the treaty, but also from those who believe the existing draft has technical problems.
There's no doubt in my mind that this draft treaty could be significantly improved. It could be improved to produce a balance in which there were fewer warheads than the treaty now contemplates, but those warheads were less vulnerable to attack.
Sources tell CBS News the administration is not looking at deep-rooted changes, only what one expert called constructive improvements. And there is still much that hasn't been settled, the issue of mobile missiles. The U.S. wanted them banned, but now says it will deploy them. This presents serious verification problems. So do the submarine-launched missiles, which are almost impossible to find. Then there is the question of Star Wars, the strategic defense initiative.
Bush could find himself in a position where, yes, indeed, he's put his stamp on the treaty, but he's done it in a way that's kept the treaty from being concluded or forced him to back away from the position.
But ultimately, the administration's biggest concern is whether it can persuade the Senate to ratify an arms control treaty. Secretary of State Baker has hinted that he believes the current draft would be difficult to ratify, and that is probably the clearest signal to expect some subtle but real changes, as George Bush makes one of the most important and far-reaching decisions of his presidency. Bill Plant, CBS News, the State Department.
Incidentally, George Bush might have a much longer title today had George Washington not insisted on being addressed simply as president. Washington rejected such loftier titles as His Highness the President of the United States of America and Protector of the Rights of the Same.
Did you know that certain kinds of diet frozen foods get 40, even 50% of their calories from fat? Eat smarter. The one you can trust is Le Menu Lifestyle. Every serving is under 300 calories, helps you limit sodium, cholesterol, and is low fat. The only thing we didn't touch is the taste. Le Menu Lifestyle. Eat smarter.
Trying to close the big sale with dirty dentures?
I just soaked them.
Soaking's not enough. Denture Cream cleans almost twice as clean as effort into 90 seconds.
Cleaner and faster.
Brush with Denture Cream or Minty Denture Gel.
Time to eat. Hey, if you wear dentures, I'll bet you know what it's like getting food stuck between your dentures and gums. Like this darn seed. Ouch. But Super Polygrip forms a seal so tight it can hold from morning till night. To help keep food out, dentures in. Super Polygrip.
This is one of 570 million refund locations for American Express traveler's checks. Now, anywhere you can find a phone, you can get a refund. Hand delivered anywhere you want, virtually anywhere in the world. But remember, this new service comes only from American Express traveler's checks. So if your bank doesn't carry them, go to one that does. Don't leave home without them.
In Washington, the wives and husbands of members of Congress are finding themselves under a microscope these days. And it's all because of allegations that Betty Wright, wife of House Speaker Jim Wright, was paid thousands of dollars without working for it. Deborah Potter has more on the dilemma of congressional spouses with careers.
As the head of the Fund for Peace, Nina Solar spends a lot of time lobbying Congress on foreign policy issues.
Most particularly this morning, obviously, we're going to be talking about the issues in Cambodia.
Precisely the kinds of issues that come before her husband, New York Democrat Stephen Solars, a ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. But the couple insists there is no conflict of interest.
I would try to influence my husband, frankly, on the issues which I care deeply about, regardless of my job.
I don't always agree, but I very rarely make an important decision without talking to Nina about it first.
They used to call it pillow talk, and in years gone by, when most congressional spouses confined themselves to volunteer work, nobody worried about it. But today, about 40% of the spouses hold paying jobs. And in the wake of the Jim Wright affair, there are new questions about how they got where they are and who might benefit.
The main thing you have to be aware of is people who, for whatever reason, want to have access through you to the member of Congress.
Iowa Republican Jim Leach says he never considered asking his wife not to work.
Everybody knows there is a potential problem, and a lot relates to not wanting to deny a spouse a career, but to make sure that that career is appropriate.
Leach's wife, Deba, runs an art gallery, helping with the expense of maintaining two households, one in Washington and one back home. And she scoffs at suggestions that clients could try to influence her husband by doing business with her.
Well, they can try. They can try. And they can buy. But there's absolutely nothing that's going to influence this particular spouse.
Nevertheless, in today's climate, the spotlight is on the spouses, and many of them resent it.
I suppose we look at people in public life now with such a magnifying glass and through such a lens that I don't know where this is going to end.
Members of Congress already have to disclose what their spouses do for a living, and some say that's all the public really needs to know.
We obviously have an obligation to our constituents and to the country, but we also have an obligation to our spouses who suffer enough as a consequence of our involvements in public life.
Some congressional spouses say the new scrutiny verges on hysteria, and they hope that it blows over before it begins to jeopardize their careers. Deborah Potter, CBS News on Capitol Hill.
And that's our news. Dan Rather will be here tomorrow. And later tonight, Bill Plant with the CBS Sunday Night News. I'm Connie Chung in New York. I'll see you again next Sunday night. Thank you for joining us and for all of us at CBS News. Good night.